Cool. So now that we've created some people, all of which are authors, maybe let's go ahead and create our real first content entry, right? I think the one that we sort of kept the simplest was the case study, where we really wanted to showcase how modular content would work. If we take a quick look back into the schema of how we structured the case studies, we had the title and description, which normal case studies would always have. But rather than going for a structured text approach, which is what we've done for the blog posts, we chose to go with, or I chose to go with modular content. The reason for this being, I wanted to have a relatively sort of not rigid, but a very specific structure in mind, where the only types of content you could have in a case study would be very simple content blocks, which is texts and images side by side, a few statistics, maybe a few questions and answers, some images and videos, and maybe a testimonial. However, we also kept a link to a person, and the intention behind this was, if we had a person as a customer who had a quote and a video associated with them, on the front end, we could simply query for this person and also render their testimonial alongside. But in some cases, or especially in like larger enterprise case studies, you might get quotes or videos, but the person might not want to be, completely associated with the case study publicly. We've all created anonymous case studies based on some customers who want to share their success, but there's some sort of confidentiality agreements in place and so on. So when we create a case study, we can look at both options. However, in most cases, I would still recommend having a reference to a person to make it simpler and just have the testimonial associated with them. So to start things off, maybe let's go ahead and create our first customer. So all of you are familiar with this part where we'd created our people before. And since I found a lovely stock photo of this man, and to validate my little terrible millennial humor, I'll just call him Beardy McBeardface for the case of this, and make him the CTO at Acme. Now here, this is a customer, which means when we associate more blocks with them, aside from just the contact info, on the front end, we may have some rules in place to also query people who are customers to bring their testimonials, which may not be the case for authors, because even if an author has a testimonial for maybe an employer branding page, it's very unlikely that you'd want to bring in testimonials for the other types of people. So let's go ahead and add a testimonial. Now we've managed to get a video recording from Beardy McBeardface. So let's go into our little folder for the case study and look for the testimonial video. But now we're going to have a little issue. I've uploaded this video as an FLV format, which is going to upload and it's going to process just fine and be available within the CMS, but I'm not going to be able to save this entry. The reason being, when we were modeling the testimonial block, we said we had a validation that the only file type accepted would be an MP4. So let's remove this and upload a new version, which we've converted to an MP4. It's going to take a while because it's a large video file, but essentially what we'll see in a couple of seconds is there's going to be no errors, and we're going to be able to go ahead and publish this record without any issues. We don't have any errors coming in. So let's go ahead and save this person, maybe publish them as well. What we could do, just as a little side quest, is look at a bulk action available in the CMS. Select all the people we'd created and just publish them all. We don't have a live website, so hey, a little bonus content here to see how you can do bulk actions in the CMS. All right, so now that we have our first customer in place, let's go ahead and actually create our case study. Let's call this All the Gains, because why not? And this is our success story with a cloud-based SaaS company. Now, the content that we would have is all modular blocks, right? So we don't really need to think about, how to structure this, the sort of entire text editor and where we want what to show up. We'll have the flexibility to rearrange these depending on what content we have available for this case study. So let's go ahead and add our first content block, which would be the main sort of content associated with this case study. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to have you stare at me type out 100 words in silence. So I've got GPT to generate a 100-word case study with 10x gains and all their stats. So let's just copy this bad boy, have them there, and associate an image with them. I mean, that's a big brain move if they've got a 10x improvement. So that seems like an apt visual representation of their success. Just break that down into paragraphs to be a bit easier to read. All right, so we've got a content block in. Now let's go ahead and add a little question. Did this successfully launch? Yes. Good for them. Maybe a bit of a statistic. So the stat could be 10x gains everywhere. And we could maybe have another statistic since we had the option to have multiple ones. And depending on how we want this to look on the front end, it's a problem for our developers to kind of figure out where to stack them up. So what else did they have? Well, yes to a launched. I'm very not creative today. And finally, maybe let's... we don't really need a video because we've already got the person, but if we didn't have a person to associate with this case study, we could also upload a new testimonial, which could be the quote and the video, or just a standalone image and video. But I think having two statistics in an FAQ and a content block is enough. So how this would look like on the front end in theory is you would have the text for the case study, you would then have the FAQ and then the statistics. But that's not how case studies really work, right? We always want to flex the statistics first. It's a great anchor to get people interested in the rest of the content. So what we do in this case is literally just drag and drop these fields to change the order in which they'd appear. So on the front end, depending on how we're querying for all of this content, this is how it's going to show up. If you have another case study without stats, just a content block and some images, you can change the layout as you please, right? Depending on all of the blocks you have available to you. If you want a stat to show in the very beginning and another one to show at the end, by all means, we can go ahead and do this. So now that we've got the content in place and kind of seen how modular content would work when sort of templatizing a page with a specific structure where we don't want to have the full flexibility of a structured text field, we can go ahead and start associating the testimonial. So if we'd forgotten to create a McBeardy face in the past, we could also have the option to create a new person and do the enrichments with the blocks and so on. But since we were thinking ahead, we can just select him from the library and go ahead and associate him here. Now, one thing to note is that we had introduced the slug field, which is the first time we're encountering this in the project on the content side. And what we'd said is we want the slug field to inherit the content from the title, which is what we'd kept as all the gains. If I wanted to change this and just override it with something like all the gains, a success story, I'm going to have an error because slugs cannot have spaces. So a quick change to a dash here will remove our error, and we're ready to go ahead and publish this. Given that we'd also had the sort of social card in place for this for the first time, we can see what a preview would look like. Now, for the case study, we hadn't really set too many rules for where to inherit the image and the description and so on. So in this case, it would most likely take the fallback option from our SEO preferences, which is something we'll cover a bit later in the future. But since we already have the title being generated from this page, we can kind of see what this is going to look like across all the different platforms if we would share these, and what it would look like in chat, on Slack, or wherever else. So there we have it. We've already created our very first case study. And what we've done here is utilize another type or category of the person model where we introduced our first customer and linked them to a testimonial video. We've then created a first case study with a very unrealistic piece of content that kind of shows you the flexibility the modular content block allows you when building out these templates. Now, we will also be looking at modular content in a lot more detail when we're creating the homepage or the about page to see what this looks like, to have a more familiar sort of page builder drag and drop template, which is, in my opinion, way more powerful when it's combined with our live feature, our live preview feature, which hopefully I will get an actual dev to implement on the project and we can take a look at in a future video. So let's stop here for now. And in the next one, let's do a bit of walkthrough on the blog post that we created, which we'll zip through on the structured text field, and then create a second post together, going and having a bit more of a deep dive into structured text to kind of see all the possibilities and formatting options and embedding options that this field provides, which should be a pretty fun one if you're using structured text quite heavily in your own projects. So I'll see you in the next one when we create a blog post.